When kids miss school, lots of school, especially young kids just starting to learn, the effects can snowball.
Take literacy, for example. We are learning to read here, right? So that later on you can read to learn. But if you don't learn to read, then the next thing, it becomes more and more challenging.
A crisis of kids missing school has beset districts around the country, and it's setting kids back, hurting their opportunities in life, hurting our society as a whole. Schools are doing all kinds of things to bring them back. Home visits, sports and recess during lunch, anything to restore the very routine of education to students' lives. One school in the North Country is having extraordinary success. What they're doing on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Pearsall Wealth Management at UBS Wealth Management USA, subsidiary UBS AG, member FINRA SIPC, 1 Broad Street Plaza, Glens Falls. And the New York State Caregiving and Respite Coalition, seeking volunteers aged 55 plus to support family caregivers in northern and central New York. Visit nyscrc/AmeriCorps.org.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Monday, December 30th. First up, a new year means a new budget session, and the New York State Education Department, also known as NYSED, is calling for additional spending for schools. NYSED is proposing a $2 billion increase in state aid for public school districts. The additional money would support initiatives like expanding universal pre-K. Sean Giambattista is the state's director of state aid. He says districts would be prioritized for pre-K funding based on how many economically disadvantaged and English language learners are in younger grades.
The regions in the past have expressed a goal of universal, truly, actually universal by 2030. This is an interim step. And when we have the report or some more analysis in terms of what will it cost on a per student basis, that may inform a different and perhaps more broad approach in the future.
NYSED is also proposing updating graduation requirements and changing what it calls outdated calculations for how teachers are paid.
Education is a very labor-intensive endeavor. And it's important that in areas where there's a premium for salaries because of cost of living, the formula reflects that. At present, the regional cost index is based on data from 2006.
Giambattista says the updated wage index would be based on 2024 instead. The additional spending would also increase direct funding to schools, also known as foundation aid, and it would update the distribution formula, which has also been criticized as outdated. It would include swapping out poverty census data from 2000 with more recent numbers. In the 2022-23 school year, 1 in 3 New York students was chronically absent. 1 in 3. That means they miss more than 10% of school days in a year. Chronic absence has a huge impact on students, on teachers, on the school environment, and the rate of chronic absenteeism has been stubbornly high for years now in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. But one North Country school district is bucking the trend. Amy Feiereisel reports on how.
Back in 2021, the Glens Falls City School District was grappling with an attendance issue. About 34% of their students were considered chronically absent. That was a big jump from just a few years prior, pre-COVID, when that number was 19%. And that was a problem, says Christy Moore, who was the principal of the Glens Falls Middle School at the time.
Because when you have students in the class that are chronically absent, it impacts every student in that class when they come back, and that teacher now has to adjust to reteach.
Glens Falls was no outlier. Their jump almost perfectly mirrored what happened statewide with chronic absence, and it was alarming. Kristlyn Dengler is the superintendent of the Glens Falls City School District. When she started in 2022, she was charged with improving the district's graduation rate.
And it didn't take long to connect the chronic absenteeism piece to that issue as well.
And that's how Christy Moore changed jobs, from middle school principal to this wonky title, Director of Multi-Tiered Systems of Support. What that actually means is that Moore is responsible for helping get chronically absent kids back in school. She says there are no easy answers here.
What's important to realize is that every single student and every family has a different story. and a different why as to their chronic absenteeism.
I asked what some of those whys are.
The compounding issues of poverty, mental health, and substance abuse, and then that leading to unstable housing, a lack of their basic needs being met.
Those are big issues and can seem impossible to tackle. Yet over the last 3 semesters, Glens Falls has managed to significantly lower its chronic absenteeism rate from that high of 34% down to about 22% last school year, and even better this fall. Here's how they did it. Moore's first step was just to get the word out, educating students, parents, and the community at large about what chronic absenteeism is.
That wasn't a term I feel like we used a lot before COVID. There were parents that just weren't aware that their children were chronically absent.
The district started sending home attendance progress reports every 5 weeks. Moore made sure each chronically absent student was assigned a check-in person. And they paid careful attention to individual students and how hard it would be to return to school. Superintendent Dengler says that's especially important for students who miss a lot of school in a chunk.
From the kid perspective, that once you're out for so long, there's a huge stress and anxiety about coming back because you already feel so buried.
She says they need a clear plan on how they're going to reacclimate. In the high school, they've got a workspace where kids can go to catch up on missed schoolwork.
But they're not maybe in 100% attendance of their classes. It's a bridge. And so it's meant to get them back in the building, let them see everybody's face again.
This is a really new way of approaching chronic absence in schools for this district and the education world at large. Before COVID, in the late 2010s, the state was really cracking down on absences in what Christy Moore called a punitive model. It often involved Child Protective Services.
It would jump right to whether it was CPS or looking at PINs or probation for that student. And now it's more about stepping back and looking at what kind of support does that child need.
Moore says they also have many more students dealing with mental health issues post-pandemic, and the old model didn't address those. She says mental health is a big factor of chronic absenteeism on the middle and high school level.
Social conflict or bullying at school, their own anxieties, the results of trauma that's occurring in the home, or the impacts of substance abuse, whether it's their own or the family's.
Mental health is a huge issue in education right now, and it's a big hurdle to getting many students back into school. Like most districts, Glens Falls has school psychologists and social workers in all their school buildings. They also have a contract with BHSN, that stands for Behavioral Health Services North, and it's a mental health network that serves northern New York. Moore says they have an open contract with them.
As soon as we're filling the clinicians that we have here, they're adding more.
Moore says the need is that great.
So we have right now 3 clinicians coming into our high school, middle school, 1 in each of our elementary schools. Still, at times, we have a wait list with those.
Regionally and nationally, there's a shortage of mental health providers and counselors. All schools are struggling to fill these positions. And that means there are often kids who have been referred to therapy but can't get it. Moore says that's heartbreaking. And that's why this fall, the district brought in a telehealth mental health company called Cartwheel.
The best part is that they have minimal wait times. They guarantee that as long as parents are responding to the intake, that students have their first counseling session within 7 days.
Moore says it's been working well so far, especially for getting students more niche therapy. Moore says it's taken a lot of work to get to this point, thinking about absent students in a different way, building connections with other local organizations.
There was a time, and I was guilty of it, where we just wanted to blame, why isn't CPS doing something? Why isn't this agency? And I think Dr. Dengler said something to me like, we can't keep blaming the other process when ours isn't working.
She says it takes community buy-in and a lot of empathy.
And just once we get the kids here, we're taking care of them, we're feeding them, we're keeping them safe, but sometimes helping them to get over that hurdle is the hardest part.
By the end of this school year, the Glens Falls City School District is on track to achieve what few schools have been able to do, getting its chronic absenteeism rate down to what it was pre-pandemic, maybe even a little lower. Amy Feiereisel, North Country Public Radio.
This is the last story of the day for 2024. We'll take tomorrow and New Year's Day off, and then we'll be back at it in 2025 on Thursday. You can always keep up with regional news through this holiday time on our website, ncpr.org. Music today by Patricia Julian of Burlington and B. Children of Canton. Happy New Year. Thanks for listening to Story of the Day. Stay safe. See you in 2025. I'm David Summerstein.